Welcome to Voice of Champions. I'm Quincy, and today I'm joined by Lolo, who is just an incredible human being. And I'm not going to take any spotlight from her introducing herself. I'm going to jump straight into question one and ask Lolo, Lolo, for anybody who's watching out there at home who might not be familiar with you, who is Lolo and why are you so passionate about women-based issues?
Thank you so much, Quincy, for having me. This is a fantastic platform. Well, we can just use one summary to say that Lolo is a sexual and reproductive health educator and advocate. But one reason why I'm very passionate about women's issue and reproductive health is that I grew up in a society, or I grew up in a neighborhood where those issues were never discussed. So it was more like an open secret. No one ever taught me about this. So it was during my journey of learning who I am as a sexual being that I found my passion. And I knew that, wow, this is something I've always known that was in me, but I never really knew how to label it. And I was never given the permission to actually talk about my sexuality and my sensuality. So that's really why I'm passionate about it, because of the scarcity of it in my society.
And Lolo, do you mind just telling us or giving us a picture of where you do your work? Where predominantly do you do your work? Do you have a global reach? Do you focus on a particular region at all? Or is your work, can it be globally translated, if I can put it that way?
Yeah, of course. Well, reproductive health and sexual health issues, especially for women and young women, is a global issue. So in as much as I started when I was in university in South Africa, I would, run around and go invite my friends and say, come together, I'm organizing an open forum. I just want us women to talk about issues. So I started there. And when I went back to Nigeria, I began to go to secondary schools. So high schools, I started talking to them about these issues. I started creating a syllabus focused on teenagers. Then I moved from high school, which was still there. Then I went to correctional centers. That's juvenile prisons. I moved into juvenile prisons because I realized that these are young kids that are being sent into the system with no information on how they can better themselves. They leave there, they come back, they are the same thing. They are worse, maybe even. So I went into juvenile prisons to also teach, and definitely grassroots communities. I like going to the rural grassroots communities where, look, the issues about sexual and reproductive health even seems like a luxury conversation. So to take it back there and have them have these discussions in an open, safe space was something that I do. But of course, like I said, it is a global conversation. So I have my grassroots, physical outreaches, but I also use digital media a lot to magnify the conversation, because what I'm going through as a woman in Nigeria is very similar to maybe what another young woman is going through in India. But it's just like we've never had the opportunity to have these conversations. So I do offline conversations, but I also use digital media to target women in different places at the same time.
I think, that's actually something that really stood out for me when I was getting to know you better, as we were having conversations as well before this talk, is your heart in these conversations that you're having. It's your heart in what you're doing and your specific or particular interest in really having conversations with those people in our communities that are considered vulnerable. And you mentioned it, right, that you started to go out into correctional facilities. And I want to understand why that is. Why are the most vulnerable in our communities? Why does that speak to you on a personal level? Because nobody goes on this journey without having some kind of personal connection to the kind of stories that you're telling, right? Of course, it's a passion, and I want to believe that it's purpose-driven as well. I just want people to understand from your point of view why speaking to children at this level is so important.
Thank you. That's a very great question. For me, the personal is definitely what drives me. Yes, I'm passionate, but it stems from something deep within me. And when I say I do with vulnerable communities, it's because I feel I see myself in them, because I've also been in the position of vulnerability. As a young girl who developed faster than her peers, you had breast milk before your classmates. People sexualized me to the extent that I accepted their beliefs and their terminologies about who I am as a sexual being. And that led me down the road of mistakes, a lot of regret, and a lot of abuse. So for me, targeting teenagers and children is just a way to empower them with information so that we can restrict any form of abuse that will be imposed on them. So if you know that the reason you have big breasts is because of your hormones, you're less likely to feel insecure when someone on the street says, "Oh, I'm sure there's a man right there that is touching your breast." You know, you would tell them that there's something wrong with you. But if you don't know, it's very difficult. You have these conflicting feelings. You know no one is touching you, but everyone keeps saying that there's someone touching you. So probably something is wrong with you deep down. So for me, it's really trying to prevent the abuse that I went through in other young women and also other young men as well. So that's really where the personal started from for me. And probably why I also go to vulnerable communities, because again, in my community where I grew up from, predominantly Igbo. What that means is like it's a tribe, but in Igbo tribe, it's the men are the head and the women are not necessarily meant to aspire for too much.
Yeah.
You can go to school, you know, get all the degrees, but at the end, you know, you're gonna get married and find a good husband, you know, that kind of thing. So for me, when you even have that perception of who you are as a woman from there, it's easy for you to see men as a target, as a goal. So you keep looking for the man who has the most resources, because being attached to him is what gives you validation. And that alone just opens you up for abuse, especially if you're a young woman who's very ambitious, like I was. And you see the way people see you as a sexual being, and people assume that you're meant to trade your sexuality for something in return. You can actually, or I did go down that route where I used to trade and exchange my sexuality for gifts, because I thought that that was me climbing up the ladder of success. So it is a really faceted issue, but I think that's really where it stems from for me, the personal. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, like you touched on so much, right? Like everything you're saying, I'm like, clock that, clock that, clock that, because everything you mentioned was so important. From the, the young girls who maybe develop a lot faster than everybody else. I saw that. I mean, I'm quite a petite person, you can see, so I didn't have that issue growing up, but I had a similar kind of background where you are sexualized very young, and I was sexualized very young. It's part of the reason why I hid behind boys' clothes, why I hid behind guy friends. I mostly had guy friends because I thought if I could camouflage around them, nobody would notice that I'm a girl, right? If I could maybe talk like them, walk like them, think like them, perhaps I could make myself less of a girl and less sexualized. So even without the big boobs, without the hips, without the bums, I think it was like the face. I don't know how else to put it, but it was like, okay, this is something that I knew I had to run away from, and I have been running away from it for a very long time. I didn't want to be considered beautiful. And on the other side of things, it's what you mentioned about how you were a girl who developed very quickly. So your sexualization was physical. And we grow up with like these two versions of girls in our group of circles, right? You have that girl that you know in school that does develop much quicker. And there's a part of you, I've seen it in friends growing up, where a group of them are jealous of that girl who's developing so much quicker. They're jealous of the attention that she's getting, and they want to emulate that or like stimulate that. But even worse, it's the bullying that starts, right? And it's what you mentioned, where everybody assumes that you're sexual just because you are being sexualized externally. And the pressure of that, I wanted to touch on that just a little bit and talk about how important that is, especially for young girls in vulnerable communities. And you mentioned that the mistakes that are made, the regrets that are made. But I think most importantly, I want to talk about how do you come out from that? And like, how do you have conversations with these girls and give them education on this level that helps them to understand, like you mentioned, it's hormonal. But deeper than that, it's a self-esteem issue. It's a confidence thing, I think. And it's about self-awareness and really understanding like what's happening to you. So I'm sorry, there's like so much that I want to talk about in the answer, but I think let's talk about that first, and then we will go on to the other things.
I love what you said about hiding yourself just because you don't want that attention. It's so interesting that even being fat, so many young women choose to add so much weight so they are not desirable to people. They hide themselves in those layers of fat. It's another conversation, but it's a very important point that you mentioned there. When it comes to breaking out of that mindset, I really believe education, information is key. We can start with the kind of movies that we put in my country, Nollywood. I mean, Nollywood is big, but if you watch Nollywood, you see the themes, you see the way they portray the women. It is very difficult for you to change the narrative when you continue to position women as these sexual people who need to be taken advantage of. So we need to start from, let's say, the media. What kind of content are we putting out there? Because again, media is one of the most powerful tools for re-education. And also when you go to schools, information, accurate scientific sex education is the most important. Not if somebody touches you, you're going to get pregnant. How about you go through the proper scientific, accurate information with these young women and young men and teach them exactly how their body functions, what happens when you hit puberty, what does those hormones do? What does it mean when your body feels like it's ready for sex? It doesn't mean that when you have this conversation, you're encouraging them to have sex, which is the predisposed, idea that when they know they want to try, but it's actually the opposite, because if you don't know, you want to try. You want to find out naturally. So we need to also provide proper education. And lastly, create an open space. I mean, when I go to schools, before I even start to teach them, when we say, do you have questions? You need to see the questions that they ask, meaning they already have these questions. They're just looking for a safe space to ask them. They're looking for a safe adult that would listen to their questions and not be like, are you really doing that? Not judge them, but just answer, what they are going through and give them the right advice or the right guidance. So when I do my classes, I use a lot of case studies. I like to use stories because now it makes it easier for them to kind of detach from the issue. Sometimes it can be too personal, it can be too heavy. But when you use a story and you use a case study and say this person is 18 and this girl is 14, or this girl is 16 and she's dating this 27-year-old guy that thinks that this. But when she goes to visit him, sometimes he makes her do this. When you have used the story, it's so easy for them to dig deep on this topic, to actually try and analyze it from a place that doesn't feel like you are attacking them. They start to connect the dots and say, even if it's not me, I know someone like this. So when we use stories and we use questions and we do a lot of discussions, people start to think about it and people start to give their own personal beliefs. And in my class, I don't go there to tell them what to do. I just give them the right tools and the right value system for them to make an informed decision. Because when it's time for them to make these decisions, you're not going to be there. You're not going to tell them, no, don't do this, yes, do that. It's going to be based on those values and based on those tools that you've empowered them with, that they will be able to make the right choices. So that's really how I do my classes.
You know what's so powerful about that, and you said it quite a few times. You said providing accurate information, and I think that is key, right? And maybe let's address that. How much misinformation is actually out there, not just about sexual reproduction or our reproductive organs, but also around menstruation. And next, I think we need to also look at and cover, can you even have these conversations isolated? Can you just have a conversation about sexuality, and can you just have a conversation about menstruation? Or whether or not these conversations are actually intertwined and interlinked. But we'll come back to that. What I want us now to discuss is the impact of misinformation and in how these young children that you are speaking to in these vulnerable communities are making decisions based on this misinformation. Like why the education and the classes that you give are so important. What are some of the, you mentioned, you said, you should see some of these questions that these kids ask. And I love the fact that you are creating a safe place for them to be able to ask these questions, because we didn't have that growing up. I mean, I'm not that old. I was born in the 80s, right? And we didn't have safe spaces to talk about these things. Even in school, if we had sex education as a subject, you knew that you couldn't ask certain questions in that space. We went to a Catholic school. You can't ask questions like that, like my body's going through this, what is happening to my body, and what should I do when my body does this? Or this guy that says he likes me wants me to do this, and I don't know if I'm comfortable to do that, and how do I have these conversations? How do I protect myself and my personal space without, because I think there's so much fear as well in girls, and I'll speak particularly in them, is you want to be liked and you want to be loved. And some of us don't come from households and spaces and communities where we get that. So it's easy to find that level of validation from young boys or men or whatever the case may be. So it's critical that you mention that safe spaces and accurate information to combat the misinformation. So if you can maybe just give us a picture of what is the kind of information that's floating out there that is like mystified.
There are lots of information, lots of misinformation that's floating out there. And I really love you just touched on something very important, the need for validation. We want to be loved, we want to be liked. And when you don't get this at home, you're going to go find it somewhere else. That is just fact. Whether you find it in an activity or you find it in a person, you are going to look for that attention, look for that validation. And many times young women, because of the world that we live in, it's such a predatory world, they find those things in the hands of the wrong person. And definitely once I've gone through all of that as well, you find it in the hands of the wrong person. So that's something we really need to be mindful of when we're also raising kids or when we're walking around with young people. Sometimes all they need is just a hug. Sometimes all they need is just a listening ear. So when it comes to misinformation, I've spoken about the one of your breast if it's big and it's been touched by a guy. They have the misinformation around things like contraceptives. In my country, they talk about if you take gin, like the alcohol gin, right after you have sex, it's going to flush everything away from your, flush the semen away from your
That's
system.
actually
This
funny.
is
I
a
don't need
very
to laugh. Yeah.
it's so interesting. Like I would think that it's only young women. No, grown women think this because they've read it somewhere, or maybe it's a past idea from their aunts and the aunts. So they say, take this, don't worry, you drink this and you sit on the toilet seat right after sex, everything will come out. They don't know that it's not true. So we end up with a lot of, what happens is you end up with a lot of maybe girls who have sex for the first time and get pregnant because they don't know anything. So that's also another thing. So also when it comes to issue of like virginity, it's so sad, but it's also funny that many women don't know what the vagina looks like. Many women do
That's
not
actually
know,
a
they have never
scary thought.
seen it.
Yeah,
Yes, they have
that's
never
frightening.
seen, they've never seen their vagina before. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know where they pee from. They don't know where the hymen, they don't know. They don't know. So they believe as you grow, they say, oh, as a virgin, your vagina is closed. They believe the hymen is closed, like there's no hole in the vagina. So I asked them, so how do you menstruate? Where does the blood come from? They've never thought about it. So even going to schools or making the videos that I do, I have to teach and say, this is what, if there's a hole, there's a natural hole in the vagina, which is why you can use things like tampon, even if you're a virgin, to for your period. But in my country, even having a conversation as with tampon, you cannot talk about it. You can't bring it up because it automatically signifies that you've had sex because your hole is open. So look at how this misinformation come in. And it's very difficult. So when we even talk about using a menstrual cup and you want to go to rural communities or you want to go to school girls to teach them about menstrual cup, if they automatically believe that the vagina must be closed, that they must only use sanitary pad, they are going to reject any form of internal sanitary pad because the idea is anytime you put something there, it only has to be a man's penis, nothing more. So no, no, when you think about it, but that's where the misinformation, it's so scary, it's so funny, but it's
I
really,
wasn't, yeah, I wasn't expecting you to say it like that. That the only thing that needs to go in there is a penis.
that is the idea. So when you go to schools, everyone is so confused when you talk about tampons and you talk about even what a vagina looks like. So that's just a little bit of the misinformation that it's there. When it also comes to hormones, I mean, just last one would be hormones. As a young girl, you're going through hormones. You don't know that hormones, it's like when you're ovulating, your body feels like it's ready for sex. Nobody has told you what that is. You're a bit confused, especially because you're a woman. But for a boy, it's different because all the Western movies, all the coming of age movies show boys masturbating. In fact, it seems like a rite of passage for young boys, teenagers to masturbate. But they don't think that women go through the same. No one talks about that form of sexuality. But when you go and you talk to teenagers, a lot of them are masturbating. It might not be with a dildo or whatever, but there are ways that they are finding to give themselves pleasure. So these little misinformation are some of the things we really need to address.
And I think that misinformation is so dangerous. You've touched on some of the consequences. And that's why education is like key and why education is so important to me too. And not just your basic, like formal structure education, right? We're talking about all forms of education here, like the classes that you give in that focus on a specific topic, but most importantly, that demystifying, that declutter all of this misinformation that's around there, because we make decisions. And you mentioned that, you said, I want to give them the tools and the value systems. And I love that, because for me, when you said that, I immediately thought of empowerment. I thought, yes, empower them to make the right decisions for themselves, not based on old wives' tales or taboo or stigma or information that was passed down from one generation straight to, down to the very last, but based on actual scientific facts. And as well, like, women and young girls would be able to protect themselves far better if they actually had the right know-how. We would be able to protect ourselves from early pregnancy, from STDs, and from HIV. We would be able to protect ourselves and say, okay, I actually know what this feeling is right now. And no, I don't want to be sexual right now. I'm not ready for that. But this is how I can deal with it. This is what my body is doing. And I think that work that you're doing is so important. And you also mentioned in there, right, how not just children have this information or these ideas about just the physique of a girl, but how the adults and the parents also have it. And I know that for you, that is also a really soft spot for you to talk to both of these parties and say, I can't just have conversation with the children. I assume because you're sitting there going, because I tell you, and you're going to go home to the same kind of environment where you're getting the misinformation from in the first place. But you mentioning that it is crucial to start having these conversations with both kids and with their parents or with their guardians, because, I find in African culture, we have this misconception that just because somebody is older makes them wise. And that's not the case. Just because they're older just means that they have lived. And we need to use discernment in the kind of advice and information that we get from our elders with due respect, right? But we need to, and I feel like the only way that you can do that is, like you said, if you have the right information, accurate information, and education. So how do you start that conversation? Because you are working in a community that sounds very traditional based, very like old schooled in like their thinking, in their tradition, and how they do things. How do you start to have a conversation with grown-ups in the room about these topics that you talk about sexuality, about menstruation, and it's such a like a, we don't talk about that, type of topic. How did you, as a young woman, how did you start to even introduce those kind of conversations into these communities?
Honestly, I just, maybe because I'm very open, I know how to talk. When I go into a community, or when I go into, sorry, I have a meeting, or when I go into a group with older people, I try and read the room. And again, it's very, I think it's just psychology. You don't go there telling them what they're doing is wrong. You just go there starting a conversation and you say, what do you think about this? You ask them for their own opinion, because they want to feel heard as well. Sometimes we think our older generation are doing things out of hate. They do some of these things out of love and protection, because that's the only information they know. So sometimes even the framing of the conversation is important. So when I go into these communities, I start by asking questions, and I see that people start responding. Sometimes they are shy. I can just, make a little bit of a joke and get them to open up. So as they start to have, thank you, as they start to have these conversations, the misinformation will come out. And it's when they start, giving us this misinformation, I start to correct it. When they say something like, I was working in the village and I talked about genital mutilation, circumcision. In my village is very rampant. And they're like, no, it will make the vagina look clean, this. I didn't go there and say, what you're doing is barbaric. I just started with, oh, really? But you know that when a girl is circumcised, it actually hurts her. Some women have died, and as she grows up as an adult, she cannot have proper sex. Sometimes if she gives birth, it's going to hurt. I'm introducing a new information to them. Now they're going back and thinking and say, oh, okay, even me as an adult, this is why I feel pain when I have sex. I didn't even know. Probably they thought that was how it was meant to be. So that is how I learn them, by asking them, give me your own information. I correct the information by updating what they already have. And when they go back home, they are talking about it from a place of empowerment, from a place of awareness. They're not going home to insult, they're going home to talk about it as if it's their own personal opinion, because I'm not telling them what I think. I'm just giving them the direction, the guidance, and the value system on how to think. So it's a very intricate, but also very interesting, because I do learn a lot. when I'm with them.
And it's so balanced. I find it's very strategically balanced, your approach and your technique. I mean, I felt like I was a little bobblehead, you know, those toys, because I'm like nodding and nodding and nodding as you're talking, because I agree with you so much. And I love the approach that you've taken. And we've seen as well, I mean, just when I think of the conversations I've needed to have with my parents, it's always better if you go there and almost like plant the seed. You have to plant the conversation. You have to make them feel empowered in how they're having the conversation. Like in my culture, it's completely disrespectful for you to call a family meeting, right? As a child in the house, you cannot call a family meeting. An elder of the house has to call a family meeting, but you can ask for one, right? You can make them feel and believe that that family meeting was called by them. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely strategic. It's clever, but I love the fact that you're giving them power. And you mentioned that you said they leave there feeling empowered, feeling self-aware, feeling like they learned something new today. And what that does is it creates engaging conversations. They're going to talk about that information that you've shared, not just with you, but with anybody else that they meet when they leave these sessions, right? They're going to have it with the auntie next door, with the teacher at school, with the lady at the grocery store. They're going to start to, like, anytime that topic comes out, their ears are going to be there going, oh, I know something about that actually. Let me tell you, do you actually know? This is actually what it is. And that's how you change the world, isn't it? Like, you change the world one conversation at a time, one empowered conversation at a time. And I applaud you. I just wanted to take this moment to applaud you, because it also takes such courage and such bravery to walk into a space with our elders. And I want people watching this to know this, right? Perhaps you don't come from an African background. Perhaps you don't come from a very traditional background or cultural background. But it is, guys. Lolo's talking about this as if it's easy. It is not.
It is not. It is not easy at all. It is. Let me tell you. It is not easy. It is not easy.
Yes, the way that she's answering makes it seem like this is an easy exercise to do, but it is not, because you also have to establish trust. You have to establish a secure environment. You have to make them feel like, you know what, they also have control of this conversation, that it is not a child who's walking up in front of them telling them how to live their lives. So it is a lot. It's a lot. And for you to manage that conversation, honestly, that is incredible. And you've touched on this as well now, right? With the conversation between sexuality and menstruation. Why is it important for you that these conversations happen together? Because it does seem like you have them together. It's not just one conversation.
Like I said, my own sexuality education, we have a curriculum and we have a syllabus. Menstruation is part of puberty and one of the most important, actually. So when we teach the syllabus, we just tackle menstruation as a normal topic. However, I still do trainings in secondary schools, in communities, just on menstruation, just on menstrual hygiene, because there's just so many misinformation, so many unknowns that people don't, actually young girls don't know about menstruation. So we can have it together, because this is something you experience almost half of your life as a woman, or even more. Yeah. So I don't know why we try to cover it if it's one of the most important aspects of a woman's life. It's just so funny. So when we talk about it in class as a sexuality education, it comes across as one of the syllabus, one of the topic. However, in schools or in communities where we don't have the opportunity to do the whole syllabus, we tackle menstruation as a topic on its own. So that's really how I try to compare the both of them. But I think it's such an important conversation, and I know this might not be the question, because in the society we live in now, girls as young as 7, 8, 9, 10 start having their menstruation. So you start menstruating and you've never been taught about menstruation. You freak out when you see blood on your panties. You don't know what is going on in your body. And even as an adult, going through menstruation, the cramps, the pain, just the way you feel, being bloated, calculating your days, it's tiresome. So imagine all of this on a girl that is 9 years old, 8 years old. She has to go through the exact same thing that you're going through at 31, and you've had at least 12, 15 years to deal with all of that. So we need to start, including this conversation, not even waiting for schools, but talking about it at home. As an adult, you're a mother, you have your daughter. I don't see why you can't take your daughter with you when you go shopping, and you pick out the sanitary pads, and when she asks you what that is, you use that as a teachable moment. to explain what sanitary pads is and what it does for a woman, just so that before she even gets to the class where they're teaching it, she's already aware of all of this. And actually, as a mother, again, you have daughters, you want to put on your sanitary pad, you go to the bathroom, you hide. You're implanting the mindset that it's something to be ashamed of. So use, I believe, everyday activities as teachable moments for your daughters so that they can learn these things from home and they can be guilt-free and shame-free when they actually start having their menstruation. They would see it as a celebration of their womanhood. Yeah.
I love that so much, a celebration of their womanhood. And my husband and I have adopted the same kind of parenting approach, that we're using everything that we're going through as a teachable moment. We don't hide anything. And I know it might seem radical for certain people, but we don't. We want our children, even as young as they are, to understand that there's just certain things that are natural and certain things that are going to happen, but also that there's nothing that they should be ashamed of. And I like that you're saying that, to say, you know, moms, take in your daughters closely, bring them in and show them that this is what it actually means like to be a woman, that there's more to what it means to be a woman than just like a woman standing on her own or taking care of the household or going to work, you know, and having a profession, that there's actually intricate stuff that's happening in our bodies. And I think it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I feel like from a dad and a boy child, they're having these conversations all the time. I
Yes.
listen to the kind of conversations that my husband has with my son, and he's only 4 years old, and they're so comfortable with having those conversations. The way my husband taught my son how to go to the toilet, I would never have known to use that kind of language or to explain it that way, because I'm not a boy. So I'm so grateful that they are open enough to have these conversations. And I think it's important that we start to have these conversations openly and freely as well. And one thing I'm really proud of that you do, and I think you are doing this with your initiative, My Body is Mine. I love this initiative so much, and I want us to get into it because I think it's such an amazing way to start initiating those conversations. Also, for some of us who might not even know what kind of words we should be using, right? I love things that are teachable guidelines. I like things that almost that I can hold and that kind of make me feel comfortable and go, okay, so if I say it like this, okay, so if I do it like this, it makes me feel safe in having those kind of conversations. And I can imagine for the 10 million other people who this initiative has reached, it makes them feel the same. But most importantly, it's connecting those two generations, from the child to the parent or guardian, to have these conversations together. And how did this initiative come up for you? Like, it's just grown. I feel like it's just like railroaded all over the place. Was this your hope for it? Was this your aim for it as well? Is it doing exactly what you intended it to do?
Thank you so much. I really also love My Body is Mine, just because I feel that in my heart I'm a teacher. I like printable things. I like holding something, you know. And I realized, for me, when I started the My Body is Mine, I didn't even think it was going to be what it is right now. I just wanted to brand what I was already teaching in school. And I said, what would be nice? How about I teach about consent? I want to come up with these children-friendly posters because I don't see them anywhere. And I know parents don't even know how to broach the topic. Sometimes they just want to give the key, read this, to help you. That's what some parents want to do. So I came up with the idea of creating these kind of content that we can design into posters, that it will be a guide for teachers, guide for parents to be able to start these conversations, but even more importantly, for children who don't even have a parent to read it to, or read to them. They can just pick up the guide, read it, and they know it already. So I wanted to create a tool that was very empowering for parents, but for the kid with them but with the kid at heart. So that's why we've continued to create these My Body is Mine posters, consent, puberty, and just continue like that. And I hope that with time and with years, we can continue to do more. Again, I talk about the power of digital media. It's really amplified what I do. So we can have it physically, but with social media, I put up these posters there, and thousands of people continue to download them and translate them in their own languages. Just because, again, I told you, this is a wild and global issue. People are talking about the same thing in Kafanchan or wherever it is that they are, because what happens through the human body, the development of the human body is universal. So yeah.
It really is, before I even knew about your initiative, right, I was extremely nervous just purely because of my own background. I experienced sexual trauma at a very young age, and then again when I was 17. So when we were preparing to have our kids, and when I had my kids, there was a lot of anxiety around that for me. Was would I be able to protect them from what I couldn't protect myself from? You know, that was where my mind was. But when our son started to get a little bit older and he started to go to like big boy school, I call it big boy school, but he's only 4. And I gained great anxiety because he was at this age that I was when I first experienced sexual abuse. And I find my husband was really amazing in terms of trying to calm my anxiety down. But one of the things that we taught him was the mantra, "My body is mine." And it's so interesting because when we started to have these conversations, it's almost like he really did become aware of his body and all the things that his body can do at this young age, right? And he started to become really proud of himself, from the jumping and the running and the whatever the case may be. But even more so, what really helped me was he would come home and say, "You know, Mama, I came home today." And I said, "Oh, why? You don't want to play with your friends anymore?" And he goes, "No, I don't want to play with them. They were playing games that I don't like." And he knows that he can come in and not get into trouble for it. And I love that. And I love the fact that your initiative is helping parents out there, is helping kids out there gain that self-awareness and help to cultivate those conversations as well. You know what, Lolo, I want to ask you something, and I hope you don't mind that I ask this, but I really want to know from you, you know, you're considered a global social activist and like leader in this space. And I know you're laughing, but it's true. Right? You're seen as a leader in the space from your work. You were listed and nominated like one of the most influential Nigerian women at some point in time. Does that blow your mind sometimes to think like where you were when you started the work you did and you were like, I want to start having these conversations. These conversations are important. Was the goal ever to be considered one of the most influential women in your country? Was the goal, or were you just like, you know what? This is something I'm called to do, and I'm going to do it one day at a time. And look at you now. Do you sometimes sit back and like wonder and like marvel at it? Are you surprised?
Honestly, I do. I have to be honest. Like, I just, like, again, it just started as something that I liked. Then it continued to grow and I can continue to build on it. But the way people know, they said, like, now I forget that people told me, and sometimes I get an email, "Oh, we found your work." I'm like, what is going on, guys? I don't even know that I am this well known. So I think it's just doing what you love to do and putting in the work and putting in your passion, and the world will definitely pay attention. It didn't happen overnight. It's taken me years. I've been doing this for years. When I started talking about sexual abuse, nobody used to watch my videos. People were like, rape again. But now everybody is talking about it. You know, it's like everybody is talking about it. But many 4, 7, 6 years ago, nobody cared. Nobody cared about this kind of issues. Nobody cared about what consent was, even more like a fairly new word. For people don't know what that is. So it's taking time, it's laying the foundation and just doing what you love and continuing to do it, and people would recognize your passion. Yeah.
That's it. I think that is actually it. It's taking the time. And I love that you brought that in because, you know, these kind of conversations are considered boring conversations. It is that. Like you rolled your eyes, you're like, oh, you know, we're talking about rape again. And it's like, yes, we're going to be talking about those things again. Yes, we're going to be talking about menstruation again. Yes, we're going to keep talking about our bodies and sexual, because as much as it might not be like an entertainment thing, it's not something that will pop up on a tabloid or in like the gossip sections of things. It is still important on a human level that we have these conversations and that we get it right. With our initiative, it's really important as well that we get to keep girls in school. And you've mentioned that you work in some of the most vulnerable communities. What does it mean when a girl child is hindered from actually having a full educational experience purely because she's on her cycle? Is this something that you come across often in your work as well? Girls missing school because they're on their cycle?
Definitely. One of the reasons why I also started like my menstrual hygiene drive, which is called No Days Off. It's because schoolgirls miss classes when they're on their periods. So we decided to do no days off, so you don't have to ever miss classes again. When there is no money for them to purchase proper sanitary pads, proper sanitary materials, they cannot leave their home. They cannot risk the embarrassment of going to school and being stained. So naturally, when you are now from an under-resourced, underdeveloped community, you are less likely to go to school because of your period, and this automatically hinders your education because you're going to a school where boys are, they don't miss classes because of anything, but every single month you have to miss 5 days. When you calculate that, it adds up. It might seem like nothing for 1 month, but in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, it continues to add up. And if people recognize that when you're on your period, you don't show up, it also restricts you with the kind of information and opportunities you're going to get because we already live in a society where people think that a woman on her period is vulnerable, she's, irritable, she cannot lead. When they associate that with when she's on her period, she doesn't even come, not recognizing that probably is the socio-economic factors that are restricting you, you lose out on opportunities as well. So it is a very important conversation for us to have. Period poverty is really, really crucial, and finding sustainable ways, just like what you're doing with the reusable cup, menstrual cup. It's a great way to tackle this because now women don't need to keep on buying sanitary pads every single month. I mean, look at a family with 3 girls or 4 girls, and all 4 of them are on their periods, and you have to buy sanitary pads for them every single month, two. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, what we call the pink tax. So it is very important for us to have this conversation.
We are absolutely done. Thank you so much for your time, Lolo. The last thing that I want to ask you is how can people reach you? If anybody wants to maybe follow your initiatives, get your book, follow you on social media, do you quickly just want to let them know how they can do that?
Yes, thank you. So you can follow me on all my social media platforms. It's LOLO_CY. That's Lolo_CY as well. Our initiative is called Lolo Talks. On our platform, you can get all our resources for free, so you don't have to pay, because I really wanted it to be a free resource for people. So you can do that. You can go on my YouTube page, which is called Lolo Talks as well, LOLOTALKS, and watch all our educational videos on sexual and reproductive health. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of our series, The Voice of Champions. If you also want to make an impact and become a Million Girls Champion, then visit our website at amilliongirlsfoundation.org and help us keep 1 million girls in school.